what didn't work, I think this movie could have been a little bit longer. Some of the exposition on Jones' character would have been nice, and maybe a little bit more recognition of the racial element by Mac without him being militant, of course. Now, the film is not rated. I'm not quite sure why. I mean, there's a few curse words and, some teenage strangeness, but that's really about it. And as far as unconvincing possibility, 0. The film felt extremely genuine and very plausible at every moment. IMDb gave it a 5.9. Rotten Tomatoes gave it a 67. The audience score gave it a 48, and I could understand why. It was definitely a little bit flat. The Cinema and Cocktails rating, I gave it a nice 3.5 out of 5 remotes. Now, I understand what the film was trying to say, even though it didn't really do a good job of trying to say it. The theme and the message was a steady undercurrent throughout the film, and I found myself waiting for the volcanic explosion. Coming in at about, like I said, a tight 84 minutes, the film had plenty of room to include more shading, into the characters, shading of the characters. And while the film, I thought, tried to deal with a very sensitive and important idea/topic, I don't think it did a good job moving the needle. I mean, there was no real definitive statement that made you, as you left the film as a viewer, trying to figure out, like, how did this really impact you? I think it's a great movie to show in school, sociology classes, or to a group studying racism or white fragility in contemporary film. But for the most part, I thought it was a solid film if you wish to discuss such matters over a glass of wine or cocktails amongst your friends. The Burns family picks up and they move from Brooklyn all the way out to Washington. And throughout the entire film, there's this totally unsettled, not quite there just yet feeling, right? They just don't seem to fit in, right? And I think part of that is because they're a little bit bitter that they've left New York. So, well, you know what? Maybe not bitter. Bitter's maybe not the appropriate word. Maybe sour. Yes, sour. That's why the drink that we're going to make for this film is going to be entitled A New York Sour. Now, how do we make a New York Sour? Man, easy. Okay. You're going to get about 2 ounces of rye or bourbon whiskey. You're going to get 1 ounce of lemon juice that you should still have from the previous cocktail and cop car. And you should have a little bit of simple syrup, or like I said before, you can use a teaspoon of sugar. And you're going to put it into a cocktail shaker. So you're going to kind of fill everything in there and shake it up for a good 30 seconds, right? And then afterwards, you're going to strain it into a glass over some ice. Now, you should have maybe roughly about, maybe a third of the glass left. What you do with that last third of that glass, you're going to fill it with fruity or kind of sweet red wine. Maybe a Shiraz or a Malbec or a sweet red wine. And then you're going to sip. That's right. That's why it's called a New York Sour, because you're combining whiskey and lemon juice and a little bit of wine. Now, I know it kind of sounds strange at first, but it goes down rather smooth. Now, like I said before, why the sour? I don't want to say that Mac was bitter, but he definitely seemed sour. And Clarky, as he was called in the movie, definitely seemed sour. But after a few sips, your palate will adjust and you should really enjoy this drink, just like I think the Burns family will ultimately do. In the hood, you carry truth in your heart, while reality stays stashed outside. Your heart says think before you act. The hood says react. But you're all alone when those reactions put you behind bars. Question is, what do you do when you get out? And how do you make sure that you never go back? That was a line that I paraphrased from the film Imperial Dreams, which follows a 21-year-old reformed gangster's devotion to his family and his future, and how those things are put to the test when he's released from prison and returns to his old stomping grounds in Watts, Los Angeles. Film stars John Boyega, Glenn Plummer, Keke Palmer, Maximiliano Hernandez, and Kalita Smith. All very, very accomplished actors. John Boyega stars as Bambi, and he's got a modest 32 credits to his name, but man, he's been in some big movies. Starting off with Detroit, he was in Pacific Rim, Attack of the Block, but most of you all probably would recognize John from his role as Finn in the Star Wars trilogy. I mean, he's got and even after all of that, he's got 5 new projects upcoming pretty soon. So, the way he's able to stretch himself into different roles, it really makes me look forward to seeing some of his work, especially seeing how he's a British brother on top of all of that. So this guy's got some skills, right? Glenn Plummer is probably the most accomplished actor out of all these guys. You may have recognized old Glenn from, I didn't realize that Glenn was in Cop Rock. Oh my God. When I was going through his resume, for all of you youngsters out there used to be a television show back in the 80s called Cop Rock, where, there was it's kind of like NYPD Blue or any other normal cop show. But whenever the police officers would show up, I guess part of the arresting sequencing was them breaking out into song, into dance. It was literally like a police musical. How did that show get greenlighted? Seriously, Cop Rock? Oh my God. Anyway, he was in Trespass. He was in Menace to Society. He was in South Central. He was in Showgirls. Yeah, he was in Showgirls. He was also in The Corner. And he's got a lot of things that are also in the works. So Glenn Plummer, he's very, very well accomplished actor. Keke Palmer, I was surprised to see her in this role because I remember her, but I mean, I have a son and he used to watch that whole True Jackson thing on Nickelodeon. So that's where I remembered her from. But man, watching her play some jailbird, it kind of threw me off a little bit. She played Chili in Crazy Sexy Cool, the TLC story, and she was also in Hustlers. So Keke's, it's interesting. I'm not sure Hollywood knows what to do with her right now because she's such a talented black woman or black actress, but there's not enough roles to go around because I think she is being horribly underused. But hey, that's just me. Maximiliano Hernandez, known as Detective Hernandez, you probably remember him when he was in The Americans. And he was also in The Avengers as, oh my goodness, the guy in The Avengers. He was the guy that was remember when Captain America was dealing with the whole issue of Hydra? He was the Hydra agent. Yes, the bald guy with the glasses. That was him, okay? And he was also in Sicario. So, again, Maximiliano has been around and is a great character actor. Kalita Smith, most of her work was in television. She goes all the way back to the TV, to the Jamie Foxx show. And most of you guys remember her from being on the Bernie Mac show. And again, watching her play the role of a drugged out mother it was tough. But, she did a good job with it. I thought she was pretty good. Now, when it comes to the characters, it's very interesting because I had to do some research on this. And I was trying to figure out, what was the meaning behind the name Bambi? So when you look it up in the dictionary, Bambi means child. It's of Italian origin, and it's derived from the Italian word bambina, kind of like meaning young girl. So I was thinking to myself, like, why would they call this guy like a young girl? And then I looked at the movie, and the movie was about, the moral of the movie was that the forest was this thing that needed to be taken seriously and preserved in the whole 9 yards because of the animals that were in it and so on and so forth. But it came to, I guess you could say, a point of clarity when in one of the monologues that was going on in John Boyega's head as Bambi, he makes this remark that, in the hood, when they give out nicknames, the softer the nickname, the harder the man. So the fact that he was named Bambi, which means young girl, that kind of gives you an idea of what kind of dude John Boyega must have been before he went into jail. So when you look at that, the myth in his name, Bambi comes home humbled but he clearly is not a punk. Okay, he is clearly not a soft guy. But his main goal is taking care of his son and getting reestablished. Now, he has a hard edge, but it's been whittled down, okay, by the expectations of society. And he truly has an understanding of as to what he has done wrong in the past, and he has made a decision that he will not go back in. And that decision, I thought, which is very, very key, takes him through all of his choices. You know, they say the way you build a character in a movie is you have your character act one way, and then you put him into a tough situation, and the decisions that he makes reveals who he is or her. And so when you watch Bambi go through a series of tough decisions, you find yourself rooting for him as the film further, moves further and further along, because you want him to be successful, because you can see in his heart he's moving in a positive, or moving on a positive trajectory. Uncle Shrimp, about as real as it gets, man. This dude is, like a lot of guys that's in the hood. He runs the streets. Maybe he gets sent away, maybe he doesn't, but he is constantly putting youngsters in peril to do the dirt for him. He is raw dog. He is conniving. He is manipulative. He is exactly the way you would expect someone like him to be, who is still in the game. I don't think his character really changed at all. He was as realistic as it gets. Now, DeAndre Bonds, who plays Gideon, he was his cousin who was kind of still in the street. And I don't want to say that he's kind of like the bad angel, but, it was kind of weird what ended up happening to him. And on the other side, his half brother Wayne was his brother trying to do right. And I thought he was kind of like the good angel. So it's kind of interesting how these two characters presented themselves in the film. And when I think about Detective Hernandez, he kind of reminded me of like this kind of hand of God. Like he was there, I guess, as the rule of law, when it came to monitoring Bambi's existence while he was out of jail. So it's kind of interesting, some of the symbols and what some of the characters were, at least in my perspective, the way I saw the movie. Now, the dialogue of the movie, man, when it comes to the street, just like in the country, people don't have time to mince words. Their interactions between each other are completely unfiltered, straight to the point, no long soliloquies. The stories that for each one of these characters is told scene by scene in their own unique way, and it has such a real raw truism to the desperate nature of survival in the streets. So I think that the way they spoke to each other was very, very accurate. I'm still not a big fan of the N-word, but, I guess if you want to keep it real, it is what it is. Conflicts in this movie, there are a bunch. Bambi versus Bambi, trying to overcome his own issues and make the right decisions for his son. Bambi versus Uncle Shrimp. I mean, how does a guy deal with a man like this? Speaking of which, obviously, if Bambi is a soft name, Shrimp is a soft name too. So both those guys must have been pretty tough, Shrimp must have been pretty tough back in his day. But how does a man like Bambi deal with a guy like Shrimp? Took care of his son, watches over his mother, and then expects things in return. Bambi versus the hood. This is that forest that needs to be taken seriously. That's another conflict, trying to deal with the environment. And then I think probably the most, I won't say heartbreaking, but man, it just made you realize that how stacked up the system is against these people who come out of jail and unfortunately fall into a pattern of recidivism. Bambi versus the system. I mean, there's a reason why that rate is so high. Society boxes you in and leaves you literally no way out but to go back into a life of crime. But it's cool because when you watch Bambi navigate it, you feel proud, you feel happy. Now, as far as the plot type goes, I think it could, I think it's just essentially, I think it's a rite of passage movie. Bambi is trying to grow up. He is trying to make the right decisions. He is trying to do right by his son. But the problems are the hood, the uncle, his environment, the system, everything around him is constantly pushing him to do wrong. And he's always trying to do right. The problem is he's trying to survive in order to find his solution. Okay, that's the issue. Okay, as he's going through all these issues and all these problems, he's trying to figure it out and find a solution, the key that's going to help him to be successful. And in order for him to find it, he has to go through all these things with absolutely no mistakes. Can't make any mistakes. Because if he does, he gets killed or he goes back to jail. Now, you could also make the argument that this is kind of like an institutionalized movie where the street and the system are enough to drive anybody crazy.